I took back my hand and I showed him the door. No dollar of mine would I part with this day, for fueling the engine of a bloody cruel war. In my forefathers' home far away, who fled the first famine wearing all that they owned, were called navigators, all ragged and torn, and built the Grand Trunk here and found a new home wherever their children were born. Their sons have no politics, none can recall allegiance from long generations before. Oh, this or oh, that name can't matter at all, or because enough for to war. And meanwhile my babies are safe in their home, unlike their pale cousins who cower and cry, while kneecappers nail their poor dads to the floor and teach them to hate and to die. It's those cruel beggars who spurn the fair coin, the peace for their kids they could take at their will, since the day old King Billy prevailed at the Boyne. They've bombed and they've maimed and they've killed. Now they cry out for money and wail at the door. But home rule or republic is all of it shame, and a curse for us here who want nothing of war. We're kindred in nothing but name. All rights and all wrongs have long since blown away, for causes are ashes where children lie slain. Yet the damned UDL and the cruel IRA will tomorrow go murdering again, but no penny of mine will I add to the fray. Remember the Boyne, they will cry out in vain, for I've given my heart to the place I was born, and forgiven the whole house of Orange, King Billy and the whole house of Orange.
Hello, my friends. How's everybody doing tonight? Can I get a confirmation in the chat that we've got signal, that my voice sounds good? And then we will get into this rabbit hole. It's going to twist and turn a bit, but hopefully you'll learn a few things, and it'll be an interesting stream. I think it's going to be a shorter stream than the last one for sure. I'm not going to do call-ins tonight, but I do have what I believe is an interesting topic for you, an interesting rabbit hole on crypto-Jewish history, and especially focusing on their influence in Scotland. So if I could get confirmations from you fellas. My voice sounds good. Can I just get a yes in chat? Voice sounds good. And we'll get on to it. I've got a million tabs open here for you guys. We're gonna, like I said, twist and turn. It's gonna be a rabbit hole. Any yeses in chat? Does the voice sound good? Also, please smash the like button. Smash it. And yeah, Bobby Barrow says, unlock the power, would love this stream. Yeah, I miss Unlock the Power, man. He just vanished. I don't know where he went. He used to be so active. I don't know if you guys, if you're in contact with him, tell him I say hello. So yes, we got confirmation. The topic of this stream is kind of a follow-up of something that I talked about on the last stream. So just to remind you all, I brought up this. I brought up this. Why won't it work?
Where
this video here, which I'm just going to leave it small because it's somehow messing up, of Kevin McDonald talking about the Morant Bay Rebellion in Jamaica.
these freed slaves killed a whole lot of white people, gruesome torture, murder, horrible thing. To the clear-thinking individual, it was plainly criminal what these people had done. An unimaginably brutal series of actions carried out for malicious reasons against a population targeted because they were white. This is 1861. And yet there was a faction in England convinced not only that it was the black population that were the victims, but also that their fellow whites were reprehensible monsters who deserved the fate that they received. This pathological response, laden with a misplaced hyper-emotionality, would shake the empire to the core, sapping its confidence, bequeathing a legacy which is felt to this day. In other words, you see these universalistic tendencies back in the 19th century, condemning whites, championing non-whites at the expense of whites. Critically interesting from our point of view, they had never traveled outside Britain. They had no experience with these people. And it's just like right now, the people in America who are most liberal are often the people who live furthest away from diversity. We see that as a very common thing, and I've heard that talking to people about Sweden. The point being that these tendencies go way back in Western history. They're not the result of Jewish intellectual movements. Okay, there's something about us that is being taken advantage of here in the contemporary world, but we can see these tendencies a long time ago.
Okay, so that's Kevin McDonald talking about the Morant Bay Rebellion, which he contends was not in any way influenced or caused by Jewish intellectual movements. Let me clarify. The rebellion itself, he's saying, was not influenced by the intellectual Jewish intellectualism, but also the response in England and Britain, condemning the way that the rebellion was put down and supporting the rebellion. Actually, he is alleging had nothing to do with Jewish intellectual movements. And in the last stream, I brought up my own suspicions, which is that it was, in fact, influenced by Jewish intellectualism, that it was the critics of the way the rebellion was put down, and really the liberals in Britain who supported the rebellion, I contend, were influenced by Jewish intellectualism. And the people that I looked at here were, this Paul Bogle guy was one of the main rebels, but he himself was influenced and sort of set up, given support, given logistical support and funding and everything else by a wealthy landowner named George William Gordon, who was ostensibly a Scotsman, okay, by the name of Gordon, from a Scottish planter family. I, in the last stream, once again, suggested that George William Gordon may have been a crypto-Jew. And I had nothing really to support that besides a couple articles that mentioned the fact that the surname Gordon is sometimes a crypto-Jewish surname. But I didn't have anything else besides that. Also, I brought up John Stuart Mill. Because John Stuart Mill, as it says here, was probably the leading celebrity supporter of the rebellion and the leading celebrity critic of the governor who put down the rebellion. And John Stuart Mill, I connected with Saint Simonianism, because he was influenced by Saint Simon, who, once again, there's a lot of sort of moving parts here. There's a lot of background you have to know, but look up my video on Saint Simonianism. That was a crypto-communist movement, essentially. It was full of degeneracy, full of very leftist liberal thought, and John Stuart Mill was influenced and part of a social milieu that was influenced by Saint Simon. But that's pretty much where it ended. I didn't have anything else. I didn't prepare any other leads, but I wanted to come back to John Stuart Mill because just this middle name, Stuart, was fascinating to me. And I started thinking after the fact, could John Stuart Mill be a descendant or a member of the high and mighty Stuart family from Scotland, the line of Stuart kings? And what does that have to do with anything? What significance is that? And so I started looking into John Stuart Mill's genealogy. And just to pause for a second, the claims that I want to investigate in this stream, and the speculations that I'm going to give here are, number one, John Stuart Mill was a crypto-Jew, and he was embedded in a milieu of cryptos. So we're going to get into that in a second by investigating his genealogy and his family connections. The second little aspect of this rabbit hole is, I believe, Presbyterianism, Calvinism, and Unitarianism, among a number of other Protestant Reformation churches, were crypto-Jewish movements from the start. But Presbyterianism, Calvinism, Unitarianism, these are the most relevant for this investigation because a lot of these alleged Scotsmen were Presbyterians, Calvinists, Unitarians, and these schools are kind of very interwoven with each other. And I believe that these were, from their inception, crypto-Jewish movements. The third point that that we're going to work our way toward is that I believe Scotland, especially lowland Scotland, pretty much mostly lowland Scotland, almost exclusively lowland Scotland, was a haven for crypto-Jews, which explains Scotland's overrepresentation in the creation of modern political ideology via the esoteric schools of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, for one, and these exoteric schools of political liberalism, of which John Stuart Mill was a part. The fourth, and this is where we really go off into left field, but I found it so fascinating that I wanted to talk about it, is that the Ulster Plantation was executed primarily by crypto-Jews moving from southern lowland Scotland to Northern Ireland, and thus the enmity between England, the English people, and the Irish people originates in large part because of the Jews. Which, when I realized this, my mind was blown. I mean, because I have Irish heritage. On my father's side, we have Irish heritage. We have relatively recent ancestors from Southern Ireland. And we definitely still feel that the Irish heritage is a part of our identity. And so I've known, I have family members who have gone to Ireland multiple times, have visited the family that we still have there. So we really feel strongly our Irish heritage, and so I've always known from a young age about the enmity, the blood feud, essentially, between the English and the Irish. And so to find out that this enmity was in large part created by a mass migration project conducted primarily by crypto-Jews, my mind was blown. I'm like, is there anything that these fucking people were not behind? And it made me think about the way that the Irish today identify with the Palestinians. So there's such a strong strain in Ireland of supporting Palestine, because Ireland, if this is all true, would have been the first Palestine. And Northern Ireland would have been essentially the first Israel, where Jews come in and just take land and kick all the natives away. So this is sort of the winding rabbit hole that I want to get down in the stream, and there you have it. So let's go back to John Stuart Mill. Now, let me look at the chat. I'm not going to be interacting as much with the chat during the stream because I just have so much to get through, but by the end, I'll take questions and I will respond to some of your comments. But for now, I'm just going to focus on this and get through all this information. So, John Stuart Mill. Like I said, that middle name, Stuart, that is a very powerful family name. And these people didn't just choose names because they liked the sound of it the way we do today. These names had meaning, and if you had a name like Stuart and you were in sort of a high position in the British society, you're kind of expected to be related to the family. You can't just choose any random name for yourself when you're in this sort of class of society. And so I wondered, is he related to the Stuart dynasty. And the first person I looked at was his father, obviously. His father, did I have it up here? And by the way, I'm sorry, my computer has been very slow and laggy lately. So here, his father, John Stuart Mill's father, was named James Mill, but he was born Milne, which in and of itself is kind of a red flag, a small red flag, but you know the cryptos always like change their names. James Milne was a Scottish historian, economist, political theorist, and philosopher. He is counted among the founders of the Ricardian School of Economics, and he wrote the history of British India, and was one of the prominent historians to take a colonial approach. What they don't mention here is that Milne was basically the colonial executive administrator of the East India Company. So very powerful, very highly connected. It says it here on WikiTree if the page will load. Yeah, I need to get my computer sorted out. I do have I have two PCs. One is better than the other, and I'm using sort of the worse one because the faster one has only like half a terabyte of hard drive space, and I filled it up completely, so I need to upgrade my storage on that one. And then once I do that, I'll start using that full time. But anyway, here, by the 1830s, Milne, the father of John Stuart Mill, was a senior executive at the East India Company. Powerful guy, powerful person. He also, being a powerful person, was connected with other powerful people. One of his closest associates, like it says here in the Wikipedia page, he is counted among the founders of the Ricardian School of Economics. Now, what was the Ricardian School of Economics? The Ricardian School was named after... I already have the tab up, so I might as well just go to it. Nope, that wasn't the right tab. The Ricardian School was named after David Ricardo. So this is one of James Milne's closest associates and intellectual peers. And David Ricardo was, I'm sure you're guessing already, a crypto. Well, not even a crypto. He was a Sephardic Jew and a banker. He eloped with a Quaker and converted to Unitarianism. So back to my one of my first points. Unitarianism being a haven for crypto Jews. And Ricardo was not just a banker, but he was a political reformer. Friends with James Mill, like it says here, Jeremy Bentham, a friend, and what I also discovered was a family member, a relation of the Mill family, Thomas Malthus, as well. And one of his most interesting connections here is an interesting detail from Ricardo, just to show you sort of what echelon of society he's working around in. There's a story that he made his fortune as a result of speculation on the Battle of Waterloo. Who else made a great fortune on speculating on the Battle of Waterloo? That was, of course, the Rothschilds. So if he also was making a giant windfall on the Battle of Waterloo along with the Rothschilds, I think it's safe to assume that he was an insider in sort of that circle, that he was close with the Rothschilds to have known the outcome of Waterloo and to make this kind of speculation on it. But an interesting fact about Ricardo, if I could find it, maybe it's in my notes. Oh, and by the way, one of the central tenets of the Ricardian school, was advocating for central banking and liberal reforms. So he was one of the first big proponents of the central banking that has just destroyed the West, destroyed our countries. But here's the interesting thing: Ricardo himself was supported by a banking house called Lubbock and Forster. It says he went into business with himself for himself with the support of Lubbock's and Forster, an eminent banking house. And I started wondering who these Lubbock's guys are. And if I have that tab, John Lubbock, a prominent member of the Lubbock's family. I'm so sorry about this lag. John Lubbock, 1st Baron Avebury, just to give you an idea of what this Lubbock family was involved in. English banker, liberal politician. He was a founding member of something called the X Club. And the X Club was founded by Thomas Henry Huxley, the initiator. And they were all about reforming academia into a more liberal ideology. And one of the things that they're known for is a major debate that was happening at the time over slavery. They denounced slavery and embraced academic liberalism, the members of the X Club. So they were all about equality, all about rejecting differences in race, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They had somewhat you-know-who-ish physiognomies. And of course, we all know, or we should know, if you look into some of my videos on the Huxley family, that these guys are the ancestors, the very recent ancestors of people like Julian Huxley, who was the first chairman of UNESCO. And we know that with UNESCO, basically, quote-unquote, anti-racism became written into official international governing doctrine. So these are the precursors of institutions like UNESCO. Not only in terms of their ideology, but even in terms of their biology, in terms of their family connections. These lines are continuous. So that just kind of gives you an idea of this milieu, okay? James Mill, just to summarize, James Mill was a close friend and associate of David Ricardo, the Jewish banker. Ricardo was, I would speculate, close with the Rothschilds, also close with the Lubbock family and their bank. And the Lubbocks were involved in the X Club, and they were, close with the Huxleys, who then became chairman of UNESCO. And so, this is the type of social and intellectual milieu that they're a part of. And if you look at the research that I've done on UNESCO and you look at the connections that I found there, you'll find that they were deeply influenced by Judaic, occult, intellectual movements such as the Theosophical Society. So these close connections, I think, draw a line back to John Stuart Mill and sort of the confluence of what's the word? The totality of the evidence, the circumstances surrounding him. I think it would be hard to argue that he wasn't influenced and sort of in lockstep with this overall ideological trend, which was deeply influenced by Judaic intellectual movements. Now, John Stuart Mill himself was, let's see, he was basically closely involved with, and I would guess if he called, like whatever he called himself at the time, would have probably been something like Calvinist or Presbyterian. He was connected with a lot of people in that line of thought. Whenever you go through, just like Gordon here, who was where was it? A nonconformist, likely Presbyterian. So that's the thing with John Stuart Mill. But I thought I had more. I should have highlighted more here. I thought I had more about him being connected with Presbyterianism. Let's just do no. But let's go back here to this. Oh, this is the other connection with Presbyterianism. The Lubbocks family, another connection they had was with another crypto-Jewish banker, Samuel Rogers. A banker and poet. who here it says was trying to enter the Presbyterian ministry. So I saw over and over as I looked at these alleged Scotsmen and Englishmen, I saw over and over, and you'll see this too if you sort of start wading through these Wikipedia pages. You'll see it over and over. Presbyterian, Unitarian, Calvinist, Nonconformist, etc., etc. And when I started looking into Calvinism and Presbyterianism, I started to realize that the Presbyterian Church especially is just a hangout for cryptos. Here we have an article from The Atlantic. If I can get anything to open in a timely manner here. Mistaken Identity, the case of New Mexico's hidden Jews. And oh God, it's going to make me, I got to go to the 12-foot wall thing to get past this. Well, you know, it's not worth wasting the time. But if you go to this link for The Atlantic, I'll paste it again so you can see. Mistaken Identity, the case of New Mexico's hidden Jews. What you find is that the Presbyterian Church in Mexico was a known haven for cryptos. And here's another link. I believe this is a university or some kind of academic journal website. The descendants of the Anusim, the crypto Jews in contemporary Mexico. And what you find is many of these people were in the Presbyterian Church. So much so that it really made me think that Presbyterianism in general was a crypto-Jewish creation. And when I started to look into this in relation to Scotland in particular, I came back across a book that I've known about for a long time, When Scotland Was Jewish. And so we'll get into this in just a second, this particular chapter, The Religions of Scotland. Did Presbyterianism have crypto-Jewish origins? I'll just, I'll read this before I start skipping around again. This book began with a provocative idea. Scotland is or was Jewish. And I'll stop there for just a second. A lot of people that when I've brought this book up in the past, I've seen reactions from people saying that, oh, this is just ridiculous. Scotland was not Jewish. How absurd. And they just kind of disregard this hypothesis on its face. But something that I want to clarify is this book is not saying that Scotland as a whole was Jewish, or that it's like one of the lost tribes of Daniel or something ridiculous like that. What it's saying is that over the span of a few centuries, from about the time of William the Conqueror up into the 15 and 1600s, there were multiple waves of crypto-Jewish migration into southern Scotland. And that a significant proportion of Scottish intellectuals, liberal reformers, and even political leaders were from this crypto-Jewish enclave that came into Scotland. The majority of the Scottish people are still Celtic Scots, but it's arguing that there is a significant number of crypto-Jews that moved into Scotland for a number of reasons, and that they became prominent figures there. So it's not saying if you're Scottish, you're Jewish. What it's saying is that there was a huge Jewish influence in Scotland for hundreds of years. So let's continue. The previous chapters have explored the Jewish ancestry and culture of some of Scotland's leading families and much of her population. We now present an equally unlikely thesis, which we nonetheless believe is correct, that the origins of the Protestant Reformation, and especially the particular form it took in Scotland, Presbyterianism, also lie in Judaic influences. Both authors of this investigation were not only told growing up that we were of Scottish origin, but that we were also raised in the Protestant faith. Just as we subsequently discovered that our Scottish roots were not Celtic, but Sephardic and French Jewish, so also we were led to question the traditional origins of Scottish Presbyterian Protestantism. And if you don't know about like Calvinism, which was kind of a precursor for Presbyterianism, there's information all over the internet that John Calvin was a crypto-Jew. That to me is kind of like, should be common knowledge at this point. John Calvin not only appears physiologically a crypto-Jew, but the religion itself is very similar to Jewish thought. It's very subversive to the existing order in Europe. And if you want to, there's just a ton of information out there about John Calvin being a crypto. So get into that kind of stuff if you want more information on John Calvin. So there's the whole chapter. I'm not going to read this whole chapter, but if you want to check it out, look into it. I believe it's kind of an open and shut case that Presbyterianism was a crypto-Jewish phenomenon. And like this guy goes through names, he goes through membership lists, he goes through DNA connections. There's pretty much to me like I said, open and shut case. So anytime you're looking through these kinds of biographies and you find Presbyterian, you find Calvinist, or you find Unitarian, that's another one. The Unitarian Church, which basically denied the divinity of Jesus, which is a very Jewish thing. It's not like a full absolute confirmation, but it's definitely a red flag. So keep that in mind as well. And then Let's get to the next point. Scotland was an absolute haven for cryptos, which is the overall thesis of when Scotland was Jewish. But I found, I think, a more succinct paper on this topic while I was researching, which is what is going to lead into the Ulster Plantation. DNA evidence suggests many lowland Scots and Northern Irish have Jewish ancestry. This is published in the Journal of Humanities and Social Science. Elizabeth C. Hirschman. This study uses the newest genealogical DNA methodology of phylogenetic trees to identify a large population of Jewish descent in the Scottish lowlands and Northern Ireland. It is proposed that the majority of these lowland Scots and Northern Ireland colonists were likely crypto-Jews who had arrived in Scotland in 3 phases, with the arrival of William the Conqueror, after the 1290 expulsion of the Jews from England, and after the 1490 expulsion of the Jews from the Iberian Peninsula, from Spain. Evidence is found that both the Ashkenazic and Sephardic branches of Judaism are present among these lowland Scot and Northern Ireland residents. So this is also interesting and can kind of get into a whole other conversation, but essentially what happened during these expulsions, that, you know, people in our circles look at they talk about, like, the Jews have been kicked out of 109 countries, and, you know, our ancestors were totally based for doing this and everything else. But what happened during these expulsions was not like an ethnic cleansing, essentially. What happened was the Jews were told, you have to convert to Catholicism or leave. So these events basically split the Jewish community into the exoteric, the visible Jews, we'll use that term, and the invisible Jews. So every time one of these expulsions happened, they were basically cleaving the Jewish community into those who were willing to hide and go underground, and those who wanted to remain visible. So I wonder, honestly, this would be a topic to get into, but I wonder how much of the modern situation we're in, how much of that divide is still present, and how much, if these are two different factions of Jews that are kind of competing with each other, or if they, behind the scenes still see themselves as brothers, and that this is like an intentional tactic. But anyway, says here, there's no written record of Jews dwelling in England prior to the Norman conquest in 1066. However, there likely were Jews remaining in Wales from the Roman era. Believing that Jewish commercial skills and experience in international trade would make England more prosperous, William I invited a large group of Jewish merchants from Rouen in Normandy to England in 1070. As time passes, these Jews became integrated into English society, some living in Jewish enclaves while others lived among Christians. These Norman Jews engaged in a variety of trades. Over time, these Norman Jews appeared to have become publicly Christian and joined the ranks of the landed gentry, while still retaining their ties to their former Jewish community. When the Norman Jews arrived in England, their legal status was not yet determined. Subsequently, during the reign of Henry I, a royal charter was granted to Joseph, the chief rabbi in London. Under the charter, Jews were permitted to travel the country without paying tolls, to buy and sell goods and property, to sell their credit pledges after holding them a year and a day, and to be tried in court by their peers, and to be sworn in on the Torah rather than on a Christian Bible. An additional clause of the charter was especially important. It granted Jews the right of movement throughout the kingdom as if they were the king's own property. This provided royal protection to Jews who may be harassed by their debtors. So, the expulsion in 1290, basically, many of the native nobles who had taken loans from Jews realized, shit, this whole usury thing is bullshit. And basically, I'm done paying you. What I would imagine is probably what happened. The way that they always put it in these academic accounts is that, they just didn't want to repay their debts. But what I like to imagine happened, and what I think is probably likely, is that these nobles, these Christian nobles, paid back these Jews exactly what they borrowed. And when they paid back, like say they took out £1,000 loan, they paid back £1,000 without really appreciating the amount that they would owe on interest. And once they paid back that £1,000, they probably told the Jews, all right, you've been paid off. Fucking kick rocks. I'm not paying you more than what you gave me. Fuck you. Fuck off. Get out of here. And the Jews didn't like that. That's my speculation. But it says here, not wishing to repay their debts, these nobles began urging the king to expel the Jews and erase the debts. To appease them, King Henry II in 1018 put forward an edict requiring Jews to wear an identifying badge and increased royal taxation of the Jewish community, essentially transferring the nobles' indebted money to his royal treasury. So that can't be right. 1018, that has to be 1218, because then it says his son, Henry III, enforced greater segregation of the Jewish community and reimposed the wearing of badges in the 1253 Statute of Jewry. But here's the important thing. There was a large caveat to the increasing segregation and taxation of the English Jews. Just as would be done in Spain during the latter 1300 to 1490 period, Jews who publicly converted to Christianity were exempted from these restrictive measures. As public Christians, the former English Jews could own land, travel freely, serve in the royal court, become archbishops and priests in the church, become barristers, court officials, and acquire noble titles. This, of course, would have led to the creation of a substantial and affluent crypto-Jewish community in England, just as it did later in Spain and Portugal. So, goes on to talk about how they kicked out the Jews who remained publicly Jewish, visibly Jewish. And here's a little section, Rethinking Scotland. To help open one's mind to the possibility that a portion of Scotland's medieval population had Jewish ancestry, images of some of its most famous rulers and heroes from that time are shown below. Take a look. William Wallace. In that portrait, he does kind of look Jewish. Robert the Bruce. That portrait also looks kind of Jewish. King David of Scotland, ancestor of Robert the Bruce. Interestingly, King David is somebody that I've talked about in the past when I was doing these like genealogical explorations of medieval kings. And I found that this guy was actually descended from rulers from Kiev, who they themselves were connected through marriages and stuff to the Byzantine Empire. So very strange, like the way that these like Eastern families worked their way up into Northern Europe is fascinating. Let me continue here. King David II of Scotland, ancestor of Robert Bruce. Very visible hook schnoz on that fella. And now we consider a third time period during which Jews may have ventured into Scotland. The expulsion of Jews from Spain and Portugal in 1490 to 1497. Very similar thing happened where the Jews were basically told here, you convert to Christianity or leave and never return. And if you don't leave, you're going to be executed. That put a ton of pressure on these Jews to convert and integrate into society even more. So during this 10-month period, even more of the remaining Jews chose to convert publicly to Christianity in order to avoid the journey across the Mediterranean. It is documented that many of the Spanish and Portuguese converso Jews entered England, Wales, and Scotland at this time. Outwardly, they maintained a Christian religious identity, but privately in their homes and communities, many maintained their Jewish identities. Evidence from recent DNA studies has shown that many of the colonial-era immigrants to both the Virginia and Massachusetts colonies from England and Wales were of Jewish ancestry. And we cannot, I believe, also assume it's not just the Virginia and Massachusetts colonies. I'd be willing to put some money on the idea that they also went to places like Jamaica, to go back to our original point. People like George Gordon, who we talked about before. This was the pattern. Moving up into the British Isles, and from there, often moving into the colonies. So George Gordon, at around this era, you know, it follows the pattern that we're looking at. But here's the interesting thing that I'd like to get into here. I'm going to play a clip. If this shit will load. You know, I'm going to play a good portion of this clip. And I shouldn't have drank this stupid RC before I started, because now I really have to pee. But I'm going to play a portion of this clip about the Ulster Scots. And I'll be right back.
Plantation, James turned to the commercial guilds of the City of London. These companies already backed settlements in America. To the tailors, butchers, drapers, goldsmiths being asked to go to dangerous Ulster, plantation was sold as a commercial opportunity. This book of maps from 1622 shows how the settlements took shape. This is a piece of cartography from long ago, but it's, you know, as anybody who has lived in Northern Ireland during the period of the Troubles, to actually see this, in a sense, the beginning of it all,
yes,
it's quite awe-inspiring.
it really is. It brings you right back to the heart of it, and you see really what was the genesis of an awful lot of the issues in Northern Ireland.
Of course, we can see when we look on the pages here, where they run through the number of people who are, for example, freeholders on this territory, 1. Englishmen on this property, 16. Natives, 186. That's the mathematics of disaster, isn't it?
In a sense it is.
That sense of insecurity is part of and continues to be a part of the Protestant psyche for a very long time. Originally, part of the idea had been to segregate, this will be the British population and the Irish will be kept apart. But that, of course, proved actually almost impossible, because no matter how hard the London companies might try to attract somebody in London, it wasn't something that was very attractive. So the whole problem was getting the numbers of people and settlers here on the ground in order to actually secure plantation.
But from across the narrow channel between Ireland and Scotland came thousands of settlers who would rescue the plantation. There'd been a long tradition of Scots migration to Ulster, but these were Presbyterians, strict Calvinists, viscerally opposed to Roman Catholicism.
These are people who have been victims of religious persecution in 17th century Scotland. They certainly see themselves as a chosen people or an elect nation. Their world consists of trials and tribulations and deliverances. And that means that they're tested by God. In Ireland, of course, they're tested by God in the form of the threat posed by the Catholic population.
The Reformation had created the most enduring division in Irish history. These Presbyterians would never be assimilated into Gaelic society like earlier settlers in Ireland. From the early 18th century, there'd been a long tradition of Scots migration to Ulster, but these were Presbyterians, strict
This is the important part.
viscerally opposed to Roman Catholicism.
They were
Between
Presbyterians.
Ireland and Scotland came thousands of settlers who would rescue the plantation. There'd been a long tradition of Scots migration to Ulster, but these were Presbyterians, strict Calvinists, viscerally opposed to Roman Catholicism.
Calvinists, Presbyterians.
These are people who have been victims of religious persecution in 17th century Scotland. They certainly see themselves as a chosen people or
They see themselves as a chosen people.
an elect nation.
An elect
Their
nation.
world consists of trials and tribulations and deliverances. And that means that they're
Trials, tribulations, and deliverances, they saw themselves. That's how the Jews see themselves. So it concurs with the overall thesis here. So I just wanted to show you that clip, and let me keep reading here. One may gain a deeper understanding of the origins of the enmity between the Northern Irish Ulster Scots, who occupy the northern third of the Irish island, and their Catholic Irish cohabitants to the south, if one considers the possibility that many of these Ulster Scots were originally Jewish. One of the goals of the present research is to document the strong likelihood of this being their ethnic origin. If one's Jewish ancestors were evicted from Spain, Portugal, and England by Catholic Christians, one is likely to carry a deep grudge against Catholics across generations. The Plantation of Ulster is the term used to describe the colonization of Northern Ireland by lowland Scots during the reign of King James I. Most of the colonists came from southern Scotland and northern England, exactly the locations in which converso Jews from England and Iberia would have chosen to live because of the large commercial centers of Carlisle, Dumfries, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. How do you say that? All of which had sea trading access. From the outset, the culture and religion of the lowland Scots who moved to Ulster differed greatly from that of the native Irish. The Ulster Scots were staunchly Presbyterian Protestant. Newly colonized land had been confiscated from the native Catholic Celtic chiefs, leading to a history of enmity over their dispossession. The new Ulster Scots colony comprised an estimated 500,000 acres of formerly Celtic-owned land. Among those involved in planning and overseeing the plantation of Northern Ireland were King James, the Lord Deputy of Ireland, Viscount Chichester, and the Attorney General for Ireland, John Davies. Portraits of both Chichester and Davies are shown below. draw your own conclusions on those physiognomies. They viewed this colonization scheme as a means of controlling the Catholic Irish population and, quote, civilizing Ulster province. The province previously had been almost wholly Celtic, Catholic, and greatly resistant to English rule. The colonization effort, we're going to come back to that in a second. The colonization effort was also intended to sever Celtic Catholic Ulster's cultural ties with the Celtic Catholic Highlands of northern Scotland. Basically, the Northern Irish and the Highland Scots were very close in culture and biological relation. They were basically the same people. The colonists were required to be English-speaking, Protestant, and loyal to the king. The Irish Catholic reaction to the plantation was hostile, a pattern that continues to the present day. One aim of the present research is to make a more accurate tracing of the ethnic roots of the Protestant versus Catholic conflict in Northern Ireland, in the hope that once its deeper origins are better understood, better progress toward mutual acceptance can be made. They never thought that someone like me would read this paper and come to the exact opposite conclusion. So let's pause there for just a second. After this section in the paper, they go into the DNA analysis. And they come up with a number of Scottish family names that have a preponderance of Jewish DNA markers. And relevant to this current discussion is Gordon. Here's a Lord Gordon. Okay, remember George Gordon, the rabble-rouser who supplied and helped out the Morant Bay Rebellion? Well, turns out the Gordons are on the list, the short list here, of, says here, within the Scottish DNA Project, there were several surnames associated with the GM201 haplogroup, which is considered one of the founding lineages of the Jewish people. And as one moves along the phylogenetic tree to GM201L497, the surnames of Davidson and Gordon are found. It is likely that the Scottish men carrying this haplotype are of Jewish descent, because cross-listed men include a Stephen Rubin from England, Richard Golden from Ireland, and a Weller from Germany, who are admitted Jews. So we've got Lord Gordon, and then carrying on here, we find the great critic of the way that the rebellion was squashed, the great supporter of the rebellion, John Stuart Mill. Gordon is listed here again. I gotta do a... Here we go. So this is then part of the EM35, EV13, which is also a haplogroup that is primarily found in the Middle East and very closely associated with Jews, and many Jews have this as a haplogroup. We find further along the phylogenetic tree, EV13 included Scottishmen named Kirkpatrick, Colquhoun, Kirk, Sinclair, as in St. Clair, Stewart, Douglas, Alexander, McCloskey, Ramsey. Okay. So Stuart. That's one spelling, but the variant Stuart is the same family name. So potentially, and also he's Scottish, potentially confirming just another piece of the puzzle that John Stuart Mill himself may have been Jewish. So also McDonald. So who knows about Kevin McDonald? But this is a fascinating paper. I'd recommend reading the whole thing for yourself, come to your own conclusions, but the preponderance of evidence, I would say, sort of suggesting that this is a strong possibility. And also, I just wanted to talk about Jewish tricks. Here, the plantation of Ulster. The way that they went about this was so Jewish. It was so like legalistic and slimy, the way that they did this to the Irish people. This is a fascinating moment in history that, we could do a whole stream on. But, this guy Arthur Chichester, John Davies, these two brains behind the operation really fucked over the Irish people in ways that only a legalistic Jewish mind could imagine. So the backstory to this is, the English had basically conquered Ireland well before this plantation of Ulster, but they had a hard time controlling Northern Ireland because, as it says here, before the plantation, Ulster had been the most Gaelic province of Ireland, as it was the least anglicized and the most independent of English control. So even though nominally the English controlled Ireland at this point, Northern Ireland was almost entirely Gaelic-speaking, almost entirely Celtic, and as it says here, the region was almost entirely rural, had very few towns or villages, certainly no big cities. And the majority of the population throughout the 16th century was overwhelmingly based on agriculture and cattle raising. They were pastoralists. Many of the Gaelic Irish practiced crating or bullying, a kind of transhumance, where they would, during the summer months, bring their cattle to upland pastures, and then during the winter months, come back to lowland dwellings. So that's how the population lived. And I mean, some estimates are up to like 200,000 people were living in this region in this ancient way, this ancient, very, this is a deeply like Indo-European traditional way of life. And these people were fiercely independent. They were very clan-based. They had no central hierarchy. They had no cities that the English could come in and control. And dealing with these people was extremely difficult because their social engineering tactics prior to this plantation, this colonization effort, basically didn't work on them. They had no big cities to come in and take over. They had no like centralized kings that they could come in and pay off or infiltrate. It was very much autonomous clan-based system. And so every time prior to this major plantation project, every time that they would come in, they would try to like create one little garrison or put a church in an area, and they would try to do it like piecemeal. And every time that they would bring in a group of colonists to do this, the native Irish would just burn it to the ground. They would come in and they'd say, "Get the fuck out of here. You're not welcome. This is our land." No. And the English had a very hard time dealing with this. They didn't know really how to handle it. And so, there's hundreds of years, at least 100 years leading up to this. The Tudor conquest was in the 1540s, so about 100, little less than 100 years. Every time they would do this, they would get spanked by the Gaelic chieftains. And so then there was the 9 Years' War from 1594 to 1603, when an alliance of northern Gaelic chieftains resisted the imposition of English government in Ulster and sought to affirm their own control. Following an extremely costly series of campaigns by the English, the war ended in 1603 with the Treaty of Mellifont, and the terms of surrender were considered generous to the Irish at the time. Following this treaty, the Irish still were not happy with English rule. So one of the head chieftains, O'Neill, and his primary allies left Ireland to seek Spanish help for a new rebellion. And when the English found out about that, this was called the Flight of the Earls. When they found out about that, the king, King James, issued a proclamation declaring that their action was treason, which paved the way for the forfeiture of their lands and titles. So here's the legalistic Jewish trick that I was referring to earlier. So a colonization of Ulster had been proposed since the end of the 9 Years' War. The original proposals were smaller, like I was saying, involving planting settlers around key military posts and on church land, and would have included large land grants to native Irish lords who sided with the English during the war. So this was their tactic before. Smaller individual plantations, colonies. However, in 1608, Sir Cahir O'Doherty of Inishowen launched a rebellion and captured and burnt the town of Derry. The brief rebellion was ended at the Battle of Kilmacrenan, and the rebellion prompted Arthur Chichester to plan a much bigger plantation and to expropriate the legal titles of all native landowners in the province. It says here, John Davies used the law as a tool for conquest and colonization. Before the Flight of the Earls, the English administration had sought to minimize the personal estates of the chieftains, but now they treated the chieftains as the sole owners of their whole territories, so that all the land could be confiscated. Okay, so prior to this event, the chieftains mentioned up here during the Flight of the Earls, O'Neill of Tyrone, Hugh Roe O'Donnell, Hugh Maguire, the most powerful chieftains in Northern Ireland, were basically the way that the English were trying to delegitimize them as rulers was to minimize what they considered the personal estates of the chieftains, to basically consider what they owned to be less than what they actually owned. But what they realized was, okay, these major chieftains have done something now that we can label as treasonous. Because even at this time in the 1600s, this was getting close to the modern era. And there was a good amount of people in England, wealthy people, powerful people, people in Parliament, etc., who already by that time were considered they were concerned with doing things legally and legitimately. They didn't want to they wanted to feel justified. They wanted to feel legitimate in doing what they were doing. And the way that these sneaky little legalistic Jews made this palatable to even like the liberal reformer, the humanitarian members of English society, the way that they made this palatable and justifiable legally was to basically, on paper, decide that these chieftains who they have reason to call traitors. Well, instead of minimizing their holdings, now they say, oh, these chieftains, they actually control everything. They actually own everything. And since they rebelled, since they are now persona non grata, all of their lands and titles become forfeited to the king. So it says here, now they treated the chieftains as sole owners of their whole territories so that all the land could be confiscated. Most of this land was deemed to be forfeited or escheated to the crown because the chieftains were declared to be attainted, which was a legal status of basically like homo sacer in ancient Rome. You're basically a non-entity. If you're declared attainted, you lose all your legal rights, even right to life. You're basically an animal. You're declared to be an animal. So because these chieftains were declared attainted, and because the legal trick gave these attainted chieftains all the land, now the crown can say, all the land belongs to us. It's all forfeited. Imagine this is like you own a home in a town, and there's a few wealthy, powerful families in your town. And those wealthy, powerful families decide to go to war with the federal government. They declare themselves independent and they go to war with the federal government. And they lose that war. This is like the federal government saying, well, those three families owned the whole town. And because they were traitors and they're now attainted, the whole town is now forfeited to us. You, individual family, or you, individual landowner, may not have had anything to do with this rebellion. You may not have fought in the war. You may not have, been involved at all. But because these wealthy, powerful families in your town went to war with the federal government, and the federal government wants to take over your whole town, they say, no, actually, this handful of powerful families, they owned the whole town, and because they owned the whole town, your house belongs to the government now. And then imagine even further, they don't just take your title to the house. They say, now we're sending in people from God knows where, some, town across the state, to live in your house. So you better leave in 10 days. That's basically what happened to the Northern Irish. Every single landowner in Northern Ireland had their rights, their land rights taken away and given to these colonists. It says here, English judges had also declared that titles to land held under gavelkind, which was a native Irish custom of inheriting land, had no standing under English law. Davies used this as a mean to confiscate land when other means failed. So you could have been somebody who inherited the land from your uncle, or you inherited the land from your father or grandfather, and that was legally yours. Nope. The government comes in and says, your inheritance customs are meaningless, and really this land was owned by this attainted family, so now it's ours. And what followed was a mass migration of these crypto Jays, these crypto Jews from Scotland, into the territory where they basically became the only landowners and the most powerful interest group at the time. And they did a bunch of shit. I mean, you could go through and look at all the ways that they screwed these people over, but it's truly amazing. I mean, it was all funded by the city of London and the wealthy, presumably Jews who controlled that corporation. And it's disgusting. It's disgusting to see, and I'm surprised. I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm always surprised when I find this kind of stuff out. So let me just finish this topic by... Oh, and God, we could go into so much here, but there's a chapter also that I wanted to talk about where the authors of When Scotland Was Jewish get into the history of the Knights Templar, Freemasonry, and Kabbalah in Scotland. They give all kinds of like architectural symbols and details to support it. So basically, you know, like the Knights Templar had a major role in Scottish history. The Freemasons kind of came out of the Knights Templar, and Kabbalah was also a big influence in the like intellectual sphere of these people. So, I mean, that's a whole other stream to get into. So I don't think I'm gonna get into all of that, but I'd like to probably like write all of this down, because there's so many moving parts and there's so many names to remember, and there's so many like things that are kind of hard to describe succinctly in a live stream format like this. But essentially, it seems to me, like I said earlier, an open and shut case that there was this crypto-Jewish presence in Scotland, and that the Scottish Rite Freemasonry was not just like Judaism for the goys, but it was just Judaism for crypto-Jews meant to influence the goys. And there's all kinds of information. The book is available for free if you search When Scotland Was Jewish PDF on Google. And of course, going back to our original launch point for this, there's some good evidence that John Stuart Mill was a Freemason. Oh, and then of course connect this to just about a century later with William of Orange, who was funded by the Jews to take over England, and he was big. He was a major player in screwing over the Irish as well. I mean, there's so much that's really it's baffling. And the major takeaway that I want people to get from this is not a black pill. I don't want you guys to black pill and think, they've just always controlled Northern Europe, or they've always controlled the white race. That I don't believe is true. What I believe is true, and what I think the takeaway should be, is that look at how long it has taken for them to get to the point that they're at today. How much effort, how much strife, just how difficult it was for them to do this to us. And the current condition that we're under didn't just come about overnight. It didn't just like appear at the end of World War II. It took a long, long march through basically our institutions and through our nations. And it wasn't easy for them. And that there's, prior to the obvious Jewish intellectual movements of the modern age, there is a deep history of crypto-Jewish intellectual movements that we have to reckon with, that we have to acknowledge and recognize. And I think only if we do that can we begin to develop our own intellectual schools of thought, essentially, and rewrite our history as one of a long struggle against this colonization that was happening by this sneaky economic, social engineering, subversive class. Because I think unless we understand how they did their subversion, how they gained their power over us, we're never going to be able to escape it. So here at the end of this page, it says discussion. The results from this research confirm the presence of Semitic and Central Asian DNA among many of the leading Scottish lowland families. The Celtic ancestry of the Scottish Highlands has not been investigated in the research. Thus, the red-haired, ruddy-skinned stereotype so often thought of as Scottish remains intact, at least for the North. However, the data clearly indicate the presence of Middle Eastern and most likely Jewish ancestry for the Scottish lowlands. Throughout this paper, images of Scots whose ancestors were found to originate in the Middle East and whose descendants now live in the lowlands, Northern Ireland, and North America have been included. Most have markedly Semitic features, and many have Mediterranean coloring. By the way, I think it's hilarious that there's scholars out there now publishing in academic journals admitting that physiognomy is basically science. That if you're good enough, you can identify this kind of stuff by looking at pictures. This is something that I've been doing for years, and some people don't consider it scientific, but I think it is scientific if you've got good enough eyes. Notably, it is these likely Jewish descended lineages that have supplied some of Scotland's most renowned national heroes and leaders: Robert Bruce, King David II, Viscount Chichester, William Alexander, Bishop Forbes, James Hay, and Archibald Campbell. It is hoped that the revelation of southern Scotland's Jewish roots will lead to a reframing of Scottish history, one that is open to recognizing the valuable contributions made by non-Celtic peoples. We close with the symbol of the Presbyterian Church of Scotland, the burning bush from the Old Testament, symbolizing God's promise to Moses regarding the future of the Hebrews. It was not consumed, and the Hebrews live on in Scotland. So this is the sentence I want to focus on here. It is hoped that the revelation of southern Scotland's Jewish roots will lead to a reframing of Scottish history, one that is open to recognizing the valuable contributions made by non-Celtic people. Valuable contributions like what? Like destroying their native culture? Like screwing their people over time and time and time again? That's the thing. I don't understand how people like this author don't see how revealing this kind of information might not be taken kindly by people who actually identify with the native people. That's amazing to me. That's the point. Once again, that's the point, is we have to understand what was our native way of life and our native culture versus what was an alien way of life and culture. We have to disentangle that. And this is the way we do it, by actually critically looking at our history, being willing to acknowledge that maybe we were wrong by glorifying people that were actually against our ancestors, that were actually against our native culture. and to find the people who really were on our side, people who really were, representative of what our forefathers lived for and stood for. That, to me, is the takeaway. These things have to be disentangled. And the more I come back to it, the more I think our native way of life was this clannish, more rural type of life. And that the whole, like, industrialization, urbanization, internationalization, mercantile economy that the modern world lives on is alien to us and is basically a cancer on the planet. That really, it's alien to most native cultures in the world. And that the people who brought this way of life around the world were almost exclusively from this one particular ethno-religious nation. So I think that's all I got for you guys today. I'm going to come back to the chat here. Chat with you guys for a little bit, and then I'm going to sign off. So how are you guys doing here? I see somebody above was asking if I have an email. I do. I'll post it in the chat. AA asks, Germ, if you had to put a number percentage chance of white children having a future, what would you put it at? Well, I'd put the percentage at 100. I believe that as long as any of our people exist, we have a chance to live. Our people are some of, you look at like statistics on interracial marriages and things like that. Whites are some of the least likely to intermarry. And as long as we continue keeping our genetic legacy alive, keeping our race alive, I believe that there will be at some point a collapse or an extreme reduction of power of these internationalists to the point where we can live our at least something approximating our native traditional way of life again in the future. Whether that's our grandchildren or our great-great-grandchildren, doesn't really matter to me. And it could even be you. It could even be, you could be the first one to do it. That they still don't have the power to make your life unworthy of living. You have the power to make your life worthy of living. You have the power to make your life one which reflects our natural racial character, our natural racial values and religion, and they can't take that away from you yet. And that's what I would recommend. That's what I've always recommended to people: is try to detach yourself from their system of dependence as much as you possibly can, and make those babies. Make those babies, because I don't think it. If we have a generation of people producing children outside of their power structures and outside of their systems of dependence, I don't think it would take long for there to be a significant sphere that we can insulate ourselves away from them with. So I look at my children and I see a bright future, no matter what they're doing to all the huddled masses of normies, no matter what they're doing in the schools, all the stuff that like mainstream conservatives complain about, like, the way that they've influenced schools, the way they've influenced the media, all that. I don't care about Hollywood. I don't care about the school system. I don't see that, like, it was Arval. I've mentioned Arval last time too, I think. But I think it was Arval who said, if you found yourself on the planet of the apes, would you try to reform ape government and ape society? Or would you go off and start your own society? Would you go off and start from scratch? I would go off and start from scratch. We are living in a house that was not built by our ancestors, essentially. And I don't want to rebuild the house. I want to build my own. And there's a lot of people that believe the same thing. And I believe it's, if it actually corresponds with our racial character, our natural instincts, then it will grow powerful. We will thrive. All it takes is making it happen. So, Schopenkeeper says, Henry, Germ thinks McDonald is anti-white. I don't think he's anti-white. I think he's confused. And I think I think that there's a tendency among these academic types to crave legitimacy. And part of that is, it's a lot easier to feel justified in that sort of environment, in that milieu, to say it's a lot less controversial. And like I said, it feels more justifiable to say it's our fault, we have to change, rather than pointing the finger at the you-know-whos. It's, for anybody who's involved in any kind of like mainstream established institution, it is career suicide to blame the Jews as much as they deserve. You can criticize them. You can come up with criticisms and critiques, but to really blame them and say, you guys did this, whole cloth, is basically career suicide, in my opinion. So personally, I feel like it's a subconscious like yearning for acceptance and justification within their own system. So anyway, that was the stream for tonight. It was, I wanted it to just be a short one. It's already gone on longer than I really wanted. Let's see, almost 2 hours now. Wow. So, oh, and here's Southern Nordic popping up in the chat. Good to see you. Yeah, I wish I had more time, but I work tomorrow, and I was already tired before I started the stream. I almost didn't do it. But the next stream, I'm going to do another, call-in hour or two, and I'll do like an extended 3-hour stream like the last one. But I just had this little rabbit hole to go down, and hope you guys enjoyed. So don't forget, if you're watching, smash the like button, share the video, and if anyone's out there who really wants to be helpful, it'd be great if somebody like clipped good parts of it. I don't have time to go back and do it. So I don't know. I'm trying to like I've said before, I've been trying to like jumpstart this channel again, get some momentum going again. And if any of you is willing to help out, it'd be great. That would be one of the biggest helps, is to find good clips. Although the way that I talk and the way I discuss topics, I'm not like a Nick Fuentes where you can get a really like funny or entertaining or shocking soundbite. But if you're willing to clip and share some of those clips, that'd be the biggest help. But that's it. That's all I got. Hopefully, and if you're someone like Southern Nordic and you have the ability to like speak on things and you feel comfortable discussing ideas and this and that, on the next live stream, feel free to call in and give me a presentation. The last live stream, I talked with the Jordan Bay, the Cuban guy, who was great, and I wasn't expecting him to have so much great information. But, if you're a guy like him and you want to call in and discuss a particular topic or give a presentation on something, let me know in advance and I will give you the floor. I'd like to do more streams that are conversations with other people and possibly even, like panel discussions with 3 or 4 people on at once. And if you're interested in something like that, send me a message on Twitter. That's, people ask for my email, but really the thing that I check the most is Twitter. The thing that I'll be most likely to see you on is Twitter. So hit me up there if you want to do something like that. So that's it. That's my stream for tonight. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Good night.